And MOSFET spectroscopy uh, is of not very extensively applied one, but a very accurate one at least for those selected examples that can be studied from MOSFET. And the principles of MOSFET spectroscopy is what we are going to study now. See now, you know, uh, we have spectroscopies which are using specific region of the electromagnetic spectrum, like the rotational spectroscopy uses microwave, the vibrational uses infrared, electronic UV, the NMR uses radio waves. Similarly, the MOSFET spectroscopy uses a very high energetic radiations, the gamma rays. Therefore, it is also called gamma ray spectroscopy. MOSFET spectroscopy is also called gamma ray spectroscopy. And there are like in any other spectroscopies, there has to be a source of radiation. So in gamma ray spectroscopy, what is the source of radiation? That's the first question. Second question is, what type of transitions are involved in MOSFET spectroscopy? Like it's the rotational energy level changes that happen in microwave, vibrational energy changes happen in IR, electronic energy level changes happens in UV waves. What energy levels are involved in gamma ray spectroscopy? In fact, this is involving the nuclear energy levels. Okay, the nuclear energy levels. And in an essence, if we have to understand nuclear energy levels, like for example, we have electronic energy levels. We also have nuclear energy levels, because even nuclears are subatomic particles whose energies are quantized. Now, any nucleus, for example, has energy levels, but few nucleus have energy levels in which the ground state energy level, of course, always the ground state energy levels are stable in any case. But for nuclei, some nuclei, the excited state is also reasonably stable for sufficient length of time. Such nucleus we are interested in, basically, in MOSFET spectroscopy. Anyways, we'll come to that part later. But let us talk about the source of the radiations. It is gamma ray source, and we require a gamma ray emitter basically when we want gamma ray radiation. So which is that gamma ray emitter here? We find gamma ray emitter from natural sources, or at least from sources, natural sources. Why I'm from the elemental sources. We know the electromagnet. We know the radioactivity of elements. That when the radioactive elements decay, they emit radiations. Which are the type of radiations they emit usually? They emit particles as well as radiations. They emit alpha rays, they emit gamma rays, they emit beta rays. They even emit electrons. So there are radioactive series which emit gamma rays also. So we can conveniently use them as our source. Of course, not all isotopes which emit gamma rays can become our source. There are certain expectations from them, like they have to be stable, they have to have a reasonably long half-life, all these things. So there is one element which qualifies all these things, and that is our cobalt 57. You see, the cobalt element has a number of isotopes, and of those isotopes, cobalt 57 is having a half-life of 271 days. So it is now having some quality according to our expectation. Long half-life, 271 days. Now, cobalt 57 emits gamma rays. Fine. Okay. Once cobalt 57 emits gamma rays, what is the product? You know, the radioactivity converts one element into another. I think you remember all those Shoddy's groups displacement loss. When alpha ray is emitted, alpha particle is emitted, which is the nucleus produced. When gamma particle is emitted, when electrons are emitted, which are the nucleus produced. All those things you know. So radioactivity converts one element into another. Similarly, our cobalt 57, it emits gamma radiation and becomes a stable iron 57. You see, the mass number is same, cobalt 57 and iron 57. But if there was only this much to the story, it would not have been very interesting from the spectroscopy point of view. But there is much more to this story because of this energy level diagram. What is that? When the cobalt emits gamma rays and becomes iron, the iron is not produced in its ground nuclear energy level. Instead, it is produced in an excited nuclear energy. And this Fe star, which we are Fe star, the excited nuclear energy level, is reasonably durable. It has considerable half-life. Now, what is the half-life of an excited iron? That we'll see later. Anyways, considerable half-life. So what happens? Now, from this point onwards, it simply becomes an emission spectroscopy. What is the bare principle of emission spectroscopy? A molecule, of course. In all the cases, still we have studied for molecules. Now it is atoms, not molecules, because it is atomic spectroscopy. Emissions. Now, emission takes place from transition from an upper energy level to lower energy level. As I told you, Fe star is not that stable. It is in its excited state. It has to relax to its ground state. And when it relaxes, it releases energy. But as it relaxes, it can either follow these two paths. Directly, a Fe star excited is converted to the Fe ground state by emission of a gamma ray, or it can go through an intermediate one more state of excited iron first and then come back to this. In this process also it can emit gamma ray. But why am I telling it is emitting gamma ray? Because the delta E is so much. Whenever either in an absorption or emission, the frequency of absorbed radiation or emitted radiation always matches the energy difference between the initial and final states. So if you calculate the energy difference from here to here, it falls in the gamma ray region. Fine. So, you know, gamma rays are very high energetic. So that implies that the energy gap between these two levels is too much, basically. And anyways, whether it is too much or small, a transition from upper to lower energy state has to release a radiation. So that radiation is released and that is in the gamma ray region now. Fine, it's okay. But it is still possible sometimes that a reverse of this can also happen. What is the reverse of this? Now a gamma ray which is emitted by the relaxation of Fe star to Fe can be absorbed by a ground state Fe and get excited to Fe star. So this is the absorption spectroscopy angle of the story. What is that? A ground state Fe57 can also observe and become excited state Fe57. But what is required for this? It only needs a radiation whose frequency or whose energy is matching the energy difference between these two states. Is it not? So in this way, the spectroscopy should be very simple one. The principle should be very simple. Why? Because you just have to have a gamma ray source, and we are having a gamma ray source here. The decay of the cobalt to iron, and in turn iron excited to iron ground itself emits a gamma radiation, and this ray can be absorbed by a stable ground state iron, get excited to its next energy level, and provide as a line in the spectrum. But okay, anyways, so now to this explanation, we will give some mathematical treatment, and what are the actual values of the hertz, all those things we are going to see now. But one more thing which is important here is, we have been discussing about the nuclear magnetic quantum number, right? Mi, or the I values. The iron in the excited state and the iron in the ground state, they have different I values. Please make a note of that. I is equal to half for iron in the ground state, where I is equal to pi by 2 for the iron in the excited state. Okay. And there is one more intermediate energy state of iron, that is I is equal to 3 by 2. And what are the implications of all these different I's? We will see later when we come to the application part. As of now, the I is not very important for our discussion, at least for the principles of the MOSFET spectrum. When it comes to application part, I value becomes important. Anyways, so this should have been simple. This is simple, a straightforward principle. For example, what is the delta E? You can calculate what is the delta E of this, and the answer comes to about 2.3 into 10 to the power of minus 15 joules per nucleus. You can multiply the number of nucleus based on your mole concept, and then find out the actual energy involved for the given amount of sample. And then convert the delta E into frequency, delta E divided by H. You get a frequency of 3.5 into 10 to the power of 18 hertz. So emitted radiation will be having this frequency, and this falls in the gamma region of the spectrum. 10 to the power of 18 hertz. It's too high, right? Now, what is the half-life of the excited state of iron Fe57? It's about 1.5 into 10 to the power of 7 seconds. It is fine. Okay. Not very, very short. Not very long. It's a experimentally realizable half-life. This is fine. 1.5 into 10 to the power of minus 7 seconds. Okay, fine. Now we have the frequency value, we have the energy value, and we have the lifetime of the excited state. Using these three things, we can calculate, in any spectroscopy we will do this, we can calculate something called uncertainty in the frequency factor. If you do that, how to calculate that? No, you can use this ready-made equation. This follows from the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Delta E into delta T is equal to H by 2 pi, and that is 10 to the power of minus 34 joule second. What is delta T? It is the half-life of the excited state. Please remember, delta T is the half-life of the excited state. If delta T is 10 to 1.5 10 to the power of minus 7 seconds, you can use that and calculate delta E to be 10 to the power of minus 27 joules per nucleus, of course. And if you convert this delta E into delta mu, it is 10 to the power of 6 hertz. So what is delta mu? 10 to the power of 6 hertz. It's the uncertainty in the frequency. What do you mean by the uncertainty in frequency? From the spectroscopy angle, see, if the uncertainty in the frequency is more, that means the lines are very broad in the spectrum. Whereas if and vice versa, if the uncertainty is very small, the lines are sharp. But you should also find out something called relative line width. For that, we take the uncertainty and divide by the frequency of the radiation absorbed or emitted. What is the frequency of the radiation absorbed? 3.5 into 10 to the power of 18 hertz. So if you do that, divide it, the relative line width is 10 to the power of minus 12 hertz. It's not hertz because the hertz have cancelled. 10 to the power of minus 12. So 10 to the power of minus 12 relative line width means a very, very sharp line in the spectrum. Very, very sharp line in the spectrum. Okay. If you compare this relative line width with that of NMR, for example, the line width in NMR is 0.1 hertz. So 0.1 hertz is how much? Is about 10 to the power of minus 1 hertz. And this is 10 to the power of minus 12 hertz. lesser the value of relative line width, the sharper is the line. Now, it is far sharper. Of all the spectroscopies, in principle, theoretically at least, the MOSFET should produce very sharp lines. So from all the discussion we have made till now, it appears that MOSFET is a very ideal spectroscopy, right? You have a gamma ray emitter, you have a gamma ray absorber, which is the gamma ray emitter here, the cobalt, which is the gamma ray absorber, iron in its ground state. And it absorbs, it gets excited to the next higher energy level by absorbing gamma ray radiation. You can detect that absorbance and then plot a spectrum and very sharp line. So MOSFET should be, at least in principle, very handy one spectroscopy. But if the story was only this, the things would have been relatively straightforward. But since we are using very high energy radiations of gamma rays, one more problem comes into the scenario. What is that one more problem? That is something called recoil velocity. Recoil velocity is a term which is used in physics, motions, study of dynamics, very commonly. Even not the quantum mechanics, even the Newtonian mechanics, the recoil velocity is there. And what is the typical example given for this recoil velocity? It's the recoil velocity of a gun, rifle, pistol. So when you might have observed or at least personally experienced, if you have coming from the NCC cadets background, there are the shooting trainings given, right? So always the guns have to be held with a lot of strength for shooting sake, because once the bullet is fired, the gun comes back and you should hold it while it comes back steadily. So this is called recoil velocity. Why this happens? Because of the principle of physics called conservation of momentum, is it not? So when the bullet is moving in high speed in a forward direction, in order to balance the conserved momentum, the source will move in the reverse direction. Okay, so that is what the velocity of bullet and the recoil velocity of the rifle is. Recoil velocity can also be used to understand a lot of properties of microscopic particles like electrons, protons, nucleus, and all. Now, this is a case. Now replace this gun with your nucleus and bullet with a photon. For example, when the Fe excited state is coming to its ground state and ejecting a proton, liberating a proton of what frequency? Gamma ray frequency. It is similar to a scenario where rifle is firing the bullet. Instead of rifle, it's the nucleus which is firing the photon now, which is giving out the photon. Photon is the bullet. Let us consider it like in that way. And naturally, like the rifle has a recoil velocity and goes back in the reverse direction, nucleus also does this, goes back in the reverse direction. So if it goes back in the reverse direction, what happens? What happens? It's the point. See, now something called, okay, I've just given a picture of this recoiling phenomena. This is the emission, absorption. We were talking about recoiling in case of an emitting nucleus. Recoiling also happens in terms of absorbing nucleus also, because now the photon is now getting absorbed by the nucleus for making transitions from lower to high upper energy transitions. So, okay, at least from the emitter side, let us understand the recoiling. Now, because of recoiling, something happens. What happens? See, this recoiling velocity. A nucleus which is emitting gamma ray, the recoiling velocity has been calculated to be around 10 to the power of 2 meters per second. It's not too much compared to the velocity of a photon, 10 to the power of 8 meters per second. It's 10 to the power of 2 meters per second. Okay, fine. But at the scale of alterations in the frequencies, it is still important, 10 to the power of 2 meters per sec. Anyways, let us consider this. Take the result from the calculations, 10 to the power of 2 meters per sec. So what's the point now? An emitting nucleus, gamma ray emitting nucleus, once it emits photons, of course, it is emitting photons continuously. That means the nucleus is not static during emission. Rather, it is moving during emission because of recoiling. Now, when a source produces waves, while it is in motion, while the source is in motion, Doppler effect comes into picture. Is it not? Because the source, when it is moved, and you have an observer, so there is a relative motion of the observer and the source. So the frequency as perceived by the observer is not the actual frequency emitted, and there is a difference in that frequency, and that difference is due to the Doppler effect. In your school textbooks, a common example is given, right? You are standing in a station and the train is approaching towards you, honking and approaching you. It can also honk, blow the whistle and leave you. So as the train is approaching you, blowing the whistle, the frequency of the sound waves is more what you hear. But as it leaves you, the frequency decreases of the sound waves. But actually the frequency of the whistle is same. I mean, originally, in reality, the frequency of the sound waves emitted given out by the whistle of the train is fixed. It is because of the relative motion of the train and the observer. The observer feels the difference in the frequency. Now the same thing happens here. Now the emitter is the iron nucleus or a cobalt nucleus, which is emitting. Now we have a detector. Let us consider. It is detecting the frequency of the gamma rays. Since the nucleus which is emitting is moving and emitting, the frequency observed by the detector is not the actual frequency which is emitted. Okay, so now how much is that shift in the frequency? When we tell that actual frequency is not detected by the detector, how much is the change in the frequency? That can also be calculated using Doppler's effect formula. Delta mu, change in the frequency, is equal to mu into velocity divided by velocity of the light. So if you do that, you take the gamma rays frequency there and the velocity to be recoiling velocity. What is the recoiling velocity? 10 to the power of 2 meters per sec. And C is the velocity of the gamma rays itself. It's electromagnetic radiation, so it is 10 to the power of 8 meters per sec. You can get a frequency difference of 10 to the power of 12 hertz. Okay, so you just now compare this difference in frequency with the actual frequency. What is the actual frequency of gamma ray? It is about 10 to the power of 18 meters hertz, is it not? But what is the difference in frequency of the gamma rays emitted due to the Doppler effect? Is 10 to the power of 12. It's not that significant when compared to 10 to the power of 18. 10 to the power of 18 and 10 to the power of 12. What's the difference? About 6. So about million times smaller, the difference in frequency. So the difference in frequency observed by the detector would be some 1/1,000,000th of the original frequency. It is still not a very significant difference. But on the spectroscopic scales, it becomes significant. Why? Because now replace the detector, what we have been talking, with an absorber. So the gamma rays which is emitted from a decaying iron nucleus or from a relaxing iron nucleus, in reality, if there was no Doppler effect, the same frequency should have been absorbed by our nucleus at the ground state, iron nucleus, to get excited to its upper state. The same frequency should have been absorbed, because delta E of this difference will be same as the delta E difference of the absorption also. But now, because of Doppler effect, what has happened? The frequency has changed. The frequency experienced by the absorber has changed. By how much? By about 10 to the power of 12 hertz. So what happens? The absorption's resonance has to take place, right? For absorption, it doesn't take place. Why? Because it is about 10 to the power of 12 times. I mean, yes, it is 1/1,000,000th of a difference in frequency. But I told you 1 millionth of a difference in frequency is not too much. But since the emission is very sharp, because I told you, right, the what is the delta mu of relative line width, sharp lines 10 to the power of 12. Maybe on an NMR, if this was to be by NMR, the frequency difference due to Doppler effect would not have been very significant. But because it is MOSFET, it becomes significant. Why? The emission as well as the absorption is very sharp. Even a shift in the frequency by 1 millionth time still won't cause absorption. Okay, won't cause absorption, won't satisfy the resonance condition. This won't cause absorption. Therefore, what happens? The spectroscopy turns head down. The whatever we called very straightforward principle, very easy method of warming, the principle, straightforward principle is not as straightforward as we thought before. Why? Because of this recoiling, because of the Doppler effect, absorption is not taking place. Okay, fine. So precisely because of this reason, the gamma ray spectroscopy was not popular, was very limited in scope, and was thought to be not that much useful. But in 1960s, there came a scientist, Mosper. Before Mosper, also the principles of Mosper gamma ray spectroscopy was there. The laid down principles were there. But Mosper did some genuine contributions which expanded the scope of Mosper by minimizing this Doppler effect. Okay, so how to minimize this Doppler effect? That means how to make the frequency shift to be minimum so that absorption should take place. That's what the contributions of Mosper would be. He used solid crystal lattice as emitters. Okay, so now I'm just running out of time. You please send your names in the chat box for that NNC. He used solid crystal lattice as the emitter. So what happens in the crystal lattice? The particles are so tightly packed, the nucleus would not experience so much recoiling, or is not allowed to recoil so much in a crystal lattice. So if the recoiling velocity decreases, Doppler effect also decreases. So the shift in the line would also, frequency of the line would also decrease, emission would also decrease. So in a way, it is useful. The second thing is, he recorded the spectrum by keeping source and the sample. Which is our source? The cobalt nucleus, which is emitting. Which is the sample? The ground state iron in our sample. The iron could be from a sample of steel, from a steel rod, or from iron minerals, ores, anything our sample can be. So the sample and the source both were maintained at very low temperature. Like, in fact, typically it is the temperature at which temperature of the liquid helium. That's the temperature which is applied. At such low temperature, all your atomic vibrations, motions would have minimized, right? Even then, recoil velocity is also minimized. Therefore, by applying these two practically significant modifications, Mosper expanded the scope of gamma ray spectroscopy. And now, today, it is possible to obtain Mosper spectrum. But we have to go more. Yes. So, despite Mosper's all effort to minimize the recoiling velocity, the recoiling velocity still cannot be eliminated fully. It does happen, but the velocity has come down. The value of the velocity has come down. Now, what happens? Now, still we can't tell the emission and the absorption's frequencies are exactly overlapping. Because of Doppler effect, even though at low temperature in solid crystals, there is still a appreciable amount of recoiling, but the shift in frequency is not too much. It is somewhere close to your absorption frequency, somewhere close. You just have to match the shift. So you just have to match the shift to the resonance frequency. How to do that? Now it is simple. If the recoiling is taking place in one direction, you can artificially apply some technique and bring the nucleus to its original direction in the reverse original position through the reverse direction. What happens? Matching takes place, resonance takes place. Therefore, instead of having a crystal, emitting crystal, which is static, you can vibrate the crystals, keep vibrating the crystal. So all your recoiling velocity and these vibrations would cancel, and it is possible that the absorption takes place at the resonance frequency. Okay, so that's what exactly done in the Mossbauer spectrometry. So the spectrometer simply consists of an emitter, that's the source, emitter of gamma rays, cobalt, and an absorber and a detector. And what is detector? It's a GM counter, Grigel-Muller counter, which is used to detect radioactivity, because cobalt is also radioactive. So a decrease in the Grigel-Muller's count would mean an absorption by the sample. So the source is vibrating. You see, they have just mounted the source on a moving trolley. But of course, this is only a diagram for our understanding sake. Practically, it is not done like this. Instead, the source is connected to a AC coil. The alternating current, when it flows, makes the source vibrate, and then see whether the resonance condition is satisfied, and then absorption takes place. So what would be the graph? What would be the spectra of what were the parameters plotted on X and Y axis for the Mossbauer spectra? For generally for other spectra, what's the parameter? What are the quantities plotted? On the X axis, it is always the frequency or the wave number or the wavelength of radiation which is getting absorbed. On the Y axis, absorbance term. But in Mossbauer, it is not that. On the Y axis, instead of absorbance, it's the counts, Grigel-Muller counts. When do you say it's a absorption has taken place? When the counts decrease. So the minimum point of the count would be the peak of our line. Is it not? So, and then what is on the Y-X axis? This is very important. It is not the frequency. Rather, because the frequency is fixed, you cannot change the frequency of the emission of cobalt. Whatever frequency it is emitting, it is going to emit always in that frequency. So already the frequency is monochromatic, right? So how, when it is monochromatic, how can you put a variable of frequency on a x-axis? Rather, what is the velocity, relative velocity of the source and the absorber? That velocity is plotted in the x-axis. It is nothing but the recoil velocity. So how much ever the recoil velocity is there, that much should be reversed to make an absorbance. Usually recoil velocity was in meters per sec, but here the velocities are plotted in millimeters per sec or centimeters per sec. That is enough to bring your bring the absorption, because you know the what is that 10 to the power of 6 hertz would be the line width. Anyways, don't worry, that's fine. So millimeters per sec or centimeter per sec is plotted on the x-axis, and a graph is there. This is a typical graph of a Mossbauer spectrum. Counts per sec and velocity of the source and absorber. That's the relative velocity, it is called, on the y-axis, x-axis. So that should give you your Mossbauer spectrum. Of course, this is only a schematic representation, but actually it is done like this. You have a source of gamma rays which is mounted on a velocity modulator. Like I told, not a trolley, instead a velocity modulator which is electrically controlled, and then sample, absorber, then the Grigel-Muller counter. So this will complete our apparatus setup. And of course, all the sample source and the samples have to be maintained at extremely low temperatures like equilibrium temperature to obtain the correct spectrum. So this is what basically the principle of Moss-Pairs spectroscopy is, or simply how the Moss-Pairs spectroscopy originates and what are the parameters terms involved in Moss-Pairs spectroscopy. Now, as always, as chemists, we don't want always a single line like this for any sample. We want some changes in the lines, patterns, number of lines, or the shift in the lines, so as to we can determine the chemical environments of the absorber. Fine, because as chemists, the application of all our spectroscopy should be for structural elucidation, getting some information about the structures of the sample specimens. Is it not? So that is what we are going to see in the next class. This line is going to be distorted, shifted, split. Why are these things happening? Applications path, basically. So in the next class, we are going to study that. Okay. So I think all of you have sent your names for the